Perhaps the greatest mistake we make when telling the stories of our transformation is that we tend to start the story in the middle. We are drawn to the lightning bolt, the dramatic moment of revelation, the triumphant final scene. But in doing so, we skip the most critical analysis, the part that gives the story its meaning and its power, the anatomy of the collapse. And that night, years ago, on the cold, hard floor of my home, was not the beginning of a story. It was the inevitable, structural failure of a life that was built wrong from its very first page. A house destined to fall long before the first storm ever hit. You see, the house I had built for my life looked sturdy from the outside. From a distance, it was admirable. I had followed all the blueprints the world hands you with such diligence. I was a disciple of the unwritten American gospel. Work hard, be self-reliant, believe in your own ability, and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. My entire foundation, the very bedrock upon which I built my identity, was a dangerous and pervasive theology that many of us don't even realize we subscribe to. The theology of the self-made man. I believed in a God, of course. I was a good church-going man. But in the quiet, honest moments, my God was more of a silent partner, a divine co-signer who was obligated to bless my efforts as long as I was diligent, moral, and competent enough. He was a means to my ends. My end was a life of secure prosperity, of respect, of visible success that would prove to the world and to myself that I had made it. I didn't realize that I had constructed my entire identity, my sense of worth as a man, a husband, and a father on the shifting, treacherous sands of my own performance. The internal monologue of that life was relentless, a constant, humming pressure behind my eyes. You are what you achieve. Your value is your net worth. Failure is the ultimate sin. Rest is for the weak. The worries that weigh on your heart, that the true word speaks of, I had learned to rebrand them. I saw them as motivation, not as the crushing burdens they truly were. I told myself that the ever-present anxiety I felt was simply the price of ambition, the necessary fuel for the engine of success. The tightness in my chest when I woke up at 3 a.m., the grinding of my teeth, the inability to ever truly be present with my family because my mind was always calculating the next move, the next risk, the next opportunity. I accepted all of it as normal. It was the cost of being a provider, a leader, a man of substance. I was trying to hold my world together with my own two hands, completely unaware that they were never designed to carry such a load. I was a man clinging desperately to the illusion of control, and that illusion was my most cherished idol. So when it all fell apart, it didn't happen like an earthquake, sudden and violent. It happened like a slow, structural rot, the kind that happens in the dark, unseen, until the day a floorboard gives way and you plunge into the abyss. The business I had poured my soul into, the one that was supposed to be my legacy, began to falter. A key client pulled out. A calculated risk turned into a devastating loss. The calls I made with confidence went unanswered. The friendly voices on the other end of the line became distant, then silent. The stack of bills on the dining room table grew from a nuisance to a daily indictment, a silent, mocking monument to my inadequacy. With each new failure, another piece of my identity crumbled. I wasn't just losing money, I was losing my sense of self. My confidence evaporated, replaced by a gnawing self-doubt. My optimism soured into a bitter cynicism. I became irritable, distant from my wife, a ghost in my own home. I was there physically, but my mind was a war zone of fear and regret. The lush green pastures the scripture promised felt like a cruel joke, a fairy tale for a world I no longer lived in. I was in a desert of my own making, and every direction I looked, I saw only desolation. That night on the floor was the final stage of the collapse. It wasn't a choice to be there, I simply lacked the physical strength to sit in a chair. The weight of my failure was a literal, physical force, pushing me down, pinning me to the ground. The despair I felt wasn't merely the fear of poverty or the shame of what others would think. It was the raw, existential terror of realizing that the me I had spent my entire life constructing, the competent, in-control man of the house, didn't actually exist. He was a phantom, a collection of my achievements and others' approval, and now that those had been stripped away, what was left? Who was I, if not my success? The silence in the house was deafening, filled only by the screaming voices of my own shame. The inexplicable anguish and the deep sadness that sometimes overwhelms your soul, that the source text so accurately describes, that was the very air I was breathing. It was a spiritual suffocation. I looked back at my life and saw only a trail of pride and foolish decisions. I looked forward and saw only a fog of uncertainty and dread. In that moment, I was utterly and completely lost in confusion and despair. It was from that place, the absolute bottom, with nothing left to offer, nothing left to pretend, that my soul finally formed a prayer that was not a request, but a surrender, a broken whisper into the darkness, a question aimed not at the ceiling, but at the very fabric of reality. Are you even there? It was not a question of God's location. It was a desperate plea for my own existence, a final admission from a soul who had built on the wrong foundation and was now buried in the rubble. And that is where in the deepest darkness, even the smallest flicker of light can feel like the dawn. And in the rubble of my collapsed life, that first faint answer, not a voice, but a profound, unshakable sense of presence, a whisper that stated the simple fact, I am here, felt like salvation. I clung to that moment like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. It was real. I was not alone. For the first time in months, a sliver of hope cut through the suffocating despair. But this is the most dangerous part of the story, the chapter we almost always edit out because it complicates the clean, simple narrative of redemption. I made a critical, nearly fatal error. I treated God's presence not as a call to an entirely new foundation, but as a supernatural tool to rebuild my old house, just bigger and better this time, with God's help. My thinking immediately and subtly shifted. The desperation gave way to a new, spiritualized strategy. Ah, now I get it. God is on my team. The first half was just a test. Now, let's get to work on the comeback. God, bless this next venture. Open these doors. Let's show everyone what a man of faith can do. Without realizing it, I had taken the profound grace of God and turned it into another strategy for self-reliance. My focus was still on my glory, my vindication, my success. I just slapped a spiritual label on it. I began to practice a form of transactional faith, an intricate system of religious performance designed to secure divine favor. I would activate my faith, just as the original script suggests, but I did it with the wrong motives. My faith wasn't in God's character, it was in the power of my own spiritual disciplines to produce a result. I started a prayer journal with a new fervor. I would write the names of my loved ones in my book of prayers, but it felt less like heartfelt intercession and more like punching a spiritual time clock. I was keeping a ledger, performing a duty with the subconscious expectation of a divine payout. It was a faith devoid of true relationship, a sterile exercise in trying to manipulate the heavens. I prayed earnestly for protection from diseases and pandemics for my family, not from a place of restful trust in a sovereign Father, but from a place of frantic fear and a desperate desire to control my circumstances, to insulate myself from any more pain. I tried my best to be faithful in small things, meticulously tracking my good deeds, believing this would automatically trigger the promise that my blessings would multiply, and that God would bestow upon me even more precious and eternal gifts. I was treating God's promises not as gifts of His grace, but as contractual obligations He owed me for my good behavior. God became less of a father to be loved and more of a cosmic investor I was trying to woo, whose favor I needed to curry. And for a while, it felt like it was working. Small things would happen, a minor bill would be unexpectedly covered, a small opportunity would arise, and I would point to them as proof that my formula was sound. But the big breakthrough, the grand restoration I was banking on, never came. Instead, a new, slow dread began to creep in. A promising business lead that I had prayed over for weeks dissolved overnight for no reason. A new, unexpected health issue emerged in my family, mocking my prayers for protection. The turmoil and rumors of wars in the world seemed to get louder, echoing the growing turmoil in my own heart. The silence from heaven felt heavier, more personal this time. It wasn't the silence of absence I had felt on the floor, it was the silence of refusal. This led to a second, and infinitely more painful, despair. The first collapse was the failure of my own strength. This second one felt like the failure of God Himself. It felt like a profound betrayal. I was keeping my end of the bargain. I was doing all the things a good Christian was supposed to do. I was trusting, wasn't I? So why wasn't He holding up His end of the deal? This is the true rock bottom, the desolate place where not only has your own competence failed you, but your religious formulas and your best spiritual efforts have also proven utterly bankrupt. You are left with nothing, no strength, no strategy, no answers, and seemingly no God. It's a terrifying, lonely place. And it was there that I finally understood that I hadn't been saved from the rubble at all. I had just rearranged it and called it a new house. It was there, in that second, deeper emptiness, that true surrender finally happened. There were no more deals to offer, no more strength left to try, no more formulas to apply. My prayer was no longer a negotiation. It was the ragged, ugly cry of a soul giving up the fight for good. There was no agenda. There was no hidden desire for a particular outcome. It was simply, if you are really there, I don't care about the business anymore. I don't care about my reputation. I am the problem. My whole way of seeing, my whole way of using you, is the problem. Whatever it takes, excavate this rubble, demolish what's left of me. I don't want my plans blessed anymore. I just want you. Show me what is real. It was in that moment of utter brokenness that I finally understood what it meant that His plans are superior to yours, and His thoughts are everlasting. My plans had led me to ruin twice. It was time to finally abandon them and ask for His. And that prayer, the one that asked for nothing but Himself, changed everything. That was the moment the real demolition could finally begin. The aftermath of that final surrender was not triumphant. It was quiet. It was the stillness of a battlefield after the war is over, the silence of a construction site after the demolition crew has gone home. There was no grand vision, no sudden infusion of strength. There was only the dawning, peaceful realization that the fight was over because I had finally lost, and in losing, I had won. It was the first day of the reconstruction, a building process founded not on my strength or my strategies, but on the bedrock of His grace, a foundation that could only be laid after the ground had been completely cleared of the wreckage of my ego. This is where the word trust was completely redefined for me. For my entire life, trust had been a calculated risk, a means to an end. It meant trusting God to deliver a specific, desired outcome. But on this new foundation, trust became something else entirely. It became the settled confidence in the character and heart of God, regardless of the outcome. It was the profound, life-altering shift from trusting His hand, what He can give me, to trusting His heart, who He is. This kind of trust doesn't eliminate fear or uncertainty, On the contrary, it thrives in the midst of it. It's the anchor that holds in the storm, not a charm to ward the storm off. I learned that true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the unwavering presence of God in the middle of it. This new life is built with the materials of a new character, a change that happens from the inside out. It's not about trying harder. It is the slow, steady result of surrendering more fully, day by day. I began to experience the reality of the promise that He was blessing me with wisdom, increasing my understanding, changing my character and granting me great patience. This wasn't an abstract concept. It was a practical, daily process. It meant consciously choosing to no longer yield to the temptation of seeing, hearing, speaking, reading, or sharing slander and lies that pollute your mind and weaken your heart. It meant turning off the news when it bred fear in my soul, scrolling past the online arguments, and refusing to participate in gossip. Instead, I had to intentionally fill my mind with what was good, pure, and just. It meant learning the difficult discipline of humility, not thinking less of myself, as I once believed, but simply thinking of myself less. And as I practiced this daily surrender of my thoughts and my will, a quiet miracle happened. The old habits, the temptations that once ensnared me, began to lose their power. The anxieties didn't vanish, but they no longer owned me. From that place of inner change, the outer world began to shift as well, almost as a side effect. The promise that new doors will open, bringing provision and prosperity to your family, started to unfold. But it was different this time. It wasn't the frantic grasping of my old life. It was a peaceful receiving. I remember a time when our refrigerator was nearly empty and a bill was due that I had absolutely no way to pay. The old me would have been in a state of sheer, white-knuckled panic. The new me, still terrified, I must admit, chose instead to get on my knees and simply hand the fear over. That afternoon, a neighbor I barely knew knocked on the door with 2 full grocery bags, saying, "I don't know why, but I just had a feeling you could use this." An hour later, a check arrived in the mail for a small freelance job I had done months ago and completely forgotten about. It was the exact amount of the bill. These were not coincidences. They were the intimate language of a caring father. I began to understand the profound security that comes from knowing that no one can harm you with lies, sorcery, or the messages of darkness, because you are covered by a love that is more powerful than any evil. The fear of what people thought, of what enemies might do, began to fade in the light of the promise that no one can curse you because I will bless you. This new foundation changes how you face conflict. Life will always present a sea of challenges, threatening to engulf you. I faced one such challenge not long after my surrender. A professional betrayal that in my old life would have sent me into a spiral of rage and panic. But this time was different. I learned what it meant to walk steadfastly on those unstable waves of conflict, not because I was strong, but because I was holding onto a hand that would not let me go. I learned to stand firm and not bow before those enemies who seek to humiliate you. It's a quiet strength, a dignity that comes not from pride, but from knowing who your Father is. This journey also led me to the hardest lesson of all: mercy. My ego screamed for justice, for retaliation, but the voice of my Father called me to a higher, more painful path: to show mercy to those who may have wronged you, turn the other cheek if they harm you again. This command is impossible for the self-made man, but it is the native language of the child of God. I learned that forgiving my debtors was inextricably linked to my own freedom, the final act of demolishing the idol of my own righteousness. And finally, this journey redefined my future. It silenced the crippling lie that my best years were behind me. I speak now to anyone who feels this way, to anyone who has been told they are too old to dream. Do not believe it. Do not come to God and say, this is only for the young, or that because of your age, you no longer believe you can achieve anything. That lie wounds the heart of your Creator. God's plan for you was written with eternal ink even before you were born. Your purpose did not expire on your last birthday. In fact, your greatest purpose may be just beginning, to become an example before your family and friends, a living testament that it is possible to overcome, to heal, and to thrive, not in spite of your age, but because of the wisdom it has brought you. The most powerful legacy I can leave my own children is not a business or an inheritance, but the memory of a father who was broken and then remade by grace, a father who learned to trade his anxiety for peace. So when I tell you that everything will be okay, please understand what I mean. It is not a flimsy promise that life will become easy or that your problems will vanish. The rebuilt house will still face storms. The winds will blow and the rains will fall. The difference is your foundation. The difference is the unshakable knowledge that the storm cannot destroy you. It can only prove the strength of what you are built upon. I urge you to make this declaration your own, the one I finally learned to speak with confidence. My past is behind me. From now on, my life, my family, my future will be blessed. Take up the map to blessings, which is His holy word, and learn from it with fervor. Find your rest in that truth. The deep, soul-settling rest of someone who has finally stopped trying to build and has allowed the master architect to take over. You are no longer responsible for holding up the walls. You are simply invited to live in the home that He is building. And that, my friend, is true freedom. That is the promise of better days are coming. Amen.